Let me tell you a story that sounds completely made up. At the absolute peak of the Cold War, one of the biggest navies on the planet didn't belong to a country. It belonged to a soda company. Yep, this is the wild but 100% true story of how Pepsi got its hands on a fleet of Soviet warships. Okay, so let's play a little trivia. The year is 1989. The Cold War is still on. Who do you think had the sixth largest navy in the world? Go ahead, take a guess. You're probably thinking of the usual suspects, right? The US, the Soviet Union, maybe Great Britain or France.
The answer was Pepsi. No, I'm not kidding. For a very brief, very strange moment in history, PepsiCo was, on paper, a major naval power. This isn't some urban legend. It's one of the most bizarre business deals that has ever happened. So how on earth did a soda company get a navy? To understand the warships, we actually have to go back in time, back to 1972. You see, this whole story starts with Pepsi making a huge, groundbreaking deal to become the very first American consumer product ever sold in the Soviet Union. I mean, this was a massive PR win, but it came with one giant, glaring problem. And that problem was all about the money, or the lack of it. The Soviet ruble was basically worthless outside of the USSR. You couldn't just take it to a bank and swap it for US dollars. So Pepsi was facing a huge dilemma. How do you get paid for your product when the only currency they have is, well, basically monopoly money on the world stage? The solution they came up with was honestly brilliant. They decided to barter. Instead of paying in rubles, the Soviets agreed to pay Pepsi in vodka. They gave Pepsi the exclusive rights to import and sell their famous Stolichnaya vodka in the United States. So Pepsi sells the vodka for cold, hard American cash, and in return, they send Pepsi concentrate to the Soviet Union. It was a perfect, if unusual, win-win. And for years, this vodka for soda trade was a huge success. By 1989, the Soviets were downing billions of Pepsis. But then, global politics threw a massive wrench into the whole operation, and the deal came to a sudden, screeching halt.
So here's what happened. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. In response, the United States slapped a bunch of sanctions on the USSR, and one of the key targets was, you guessed it, Stolichnaya vodka. And just like that, the very foundation of Pepsi's entire business in the Soviet Union, it just vanished. The vodka well had run dry.
But here's the thing. The Soviets were hooked. They still wanted their Pepsi, and they didn't just want a little bit. They were ready to sign a brand new deal worth $3 billion. But with vodka off the table, they had to come up with something else to trade, something big. So the Soviet leadership went back to the drawing board and came back with a new offer. And it was an offer that was, to put it mildly, out of left field. As one source described it, the deal was so insane it's almost unbelievable. It really sounded less like something from a business meeting and more like a plot from a James Bond movie. They weren't offering oil or diamonds or gold. They offered their military hardware. In exchange for $3 billion worth of soda, the Soviets offered Pepsi 17 submarines, a cruiser, a frigate, and a destroyer. Just like that, the CEO of PepsiCo could call himself an admiral. He even famously joked to the U.S. National Security Advisor, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are."
Now, as incredible as the Pepsi Navy sounds, we do need a bit of a reality check here. The headlines wrote themselves, but the truth behind this so-called fleet was a little less formidable. You see, these weren't exactly state-of-the-art warships ready to launch an attack. They were old, retired, decommissioned vessels that were basically rusting away. The Soviets didn't even want them anymore. Pepsi's goal wasn't to take over the world. It was simply to figure out how to turn this very, very weird asset into actual money. But here's the crazy part. Even if they were just floating heaps of junk, the sheer numbers were still wild. With 17 submarines, Pepsi's fleet was numerically larger than the submarine forces of major countries like India or France today. It was that raw number that briefly and bizarrely made them the sixth largest naval power in the world. So, what does a soft drink company do with an obsolete Soviet naval fleet? Well, they did the most logical thing possible. They sold the whole lot for scrap metal to a company in Sweden. And the grand total they got for the Navy that secured a $3 billion Pepsi deal? Just $3 million. The warships were never the real prize. They were just the bizarre key that unlocked the deal. But hang on, because the story doesn't end there.
While all this insanity with warships and soda was happening, the world itself was changing. The Berlin Wall was coming down, and the Soviet Union was on the verge of collapsing. And all that chaos? Well, for a company like Pepsi, it was a brand new opportunity.
The pace of change was just incredible. The warship deal gets signed in 1989. Then, just 2 years later, poof, the Soviet Union is gone. And in its place are new independent nations, like Ukraine. So what does Pepsi do? It adapts. It goes right back to the negotiating table. But this time, they're talking directly with the new government of Ukraine.
And this new deal with Ukraine shows just how smart their strategy was. They weren't asking for more old junk. This time, they traded Pepsi concentrate for brand new, modern, and very valuable oil tankers. And they didn't stop there. They also worked in a deal to massively expand their Pizza Hut restaurants in the country. This wasn't just bartering anymore. This was smart, long-term investment.
So when you look back at this whole wild saga of soda and submarines, what's the real takeaway? I mean, it's a fantastic piece of trivia, for sure, but it's also a masterclass in creative thinking when the normal rules of business just go right out the window. At its very core, this whole thing comes down to one of the oldest forms of commerce on Earth: barter. When your money is no good, value becomes whatever two people agree it is. For Pepsi and the Soviets, value looked like vodka, and then it looked like warships. It's a powerful reminder that in business, if the stakes are high enough, literally anything can become a form of payment.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. In a world that runs on spreadsheets and strict rules, what's the real value of coming up with a solution that, on the surface, looks completely insane? The story of the Pepsi Navy shows us that sometimes the most creative and successful path forward is the one that makes absolutely no logical sense at first glance. It proves that sometimes you really can trade soda for submarines.